Some criminal cases, they just become legendary. And it's not always just about the crime itself, but about the specific kind of danger they unleash on the world. It's a type of fear that really gets into our collective psyche. And, honestly, it changes how we think about evil. This is the anatomy of infamy. So what is it? What makes one case just fade away while another becomes a permanent part of our darkest stories? How does a criminal go from being just another name on a file to a true symbol of terror? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down that very idea of danger. We'll do it by looking at 3 huge cases, each one representing a totally unique and totally terrifying face of human evil. Let's start with a big one. Maybe the most infamous ghost in the history of crime. We're going back to the late 1800s in London, to a case that basically wrote the book on the terror of a killer who was somehow everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The year is 1888. Picture the scene, the gaslit, grimy streets of Whitechapel, London. Suddenly, a series of absolutely horrific murders starts, and the whole city is just gripped by fear. And the most terrifying part, the part that still gives people chills today, the killer was never, ever found. I mean, the level of violence in these crimes was just off the charts for the time. Victims like Annie Chapman and Mary Jane Kelly weren't just killed. They were subjected to these awful mutilations, even disembowelment. This wasn't just murder. It was absolute butchery. And here is where it gets really creepy. You have this terrifying contradiction. On one hand, you've got pure savagery, but on the other, there was a chilling precision. The way the killer worked suggested he had some kind of surgical or anatomical knowledge, which made him seem like much more than just a random madman. So you see, the real danger of Jack the Ripper wasn't just his knife, it was the fear of a phantom, this intelligent, methodical killer who could just materialize from the shadows, strike, and then vanish. He avoided being caught completely, sparking a panic so huge it actually forced the police to start developing early forensic methods just to have a chance. Okay, so that's the terror of the unknown, but what about when the danger isn't a mystery at all? Sometimes the horror comes from knowing exactly who the monster is and the unspeakable things he did. So for this, let's turn to the case of Raja Kalander from India. His story kicks off with a label we've all heard before, serial killer. But that label, as chilling as it is, trust me, it only scratches the surface. It tells you what he was, but it does nothing to prepare you for the how or the why. And that's where the real depravity lies. Because Kalander's crimes went to a place that it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. He wasn't just a killer who took lives. He was a cannibal. He consumed his victims. That act alone crosses such a fundamental human taboo. It shifts the crime from murder into something primal, something that attacks the very definition of what it means to be human. And to complete this absolutely horrifying profile, Kalander was also a skull collector. He literally kept the skulls of his victims as trophies, boiling them to clean off the flesh. This wasn't a crime of passion, not at all. This was a ritual of possession. The psychological impact of just knowing these facts is staggering. You're not looking at a hidden phantom, but a man who reveled in his own pure evil. And that brings us to the core of this case, depravity. See, unlike the Ripper, the terror of Kalander wasn't in what we didn't know. It was in what we did know. It was being confronted with this extreme, documented wickedness that just defies all comprehension. And the shadow this guy cast was long. It took a full 25 years before he was finally sentenced to life in prison, and that was just for one of his cases, a double murder. A quarter century before this particular face of evil was finally locked away. So, we've seen the historical phantom and the monster whose evil was on full display. But what does danger look like now, in our modern world saturated with technology? Well, that brings us to our third case. In a recent case, a killer walked into a parking garage with a plan that was just chillingly methodical. Before doing anything else, he went around and spray-painted the surveillance cameras one by one. Now, despite his efforts, he was partially captured on some footage, but to this day, he's a ghost, unidentified. And this right here, this is a totally new kind of danger. We tend to think of technology as our shield, right? Our all-seeing eye. But in this case, the killer turned our own tools against us, deliberately creating his own blind spots. He became a ghost in the machine, proving that modern anonymity is a very real and very frightening possibility. Okay, so let's pull back for a second. What happens when we put these three very different faces of danger side by side? You start to see this fascinating evolution of what it even means to be a threat. This chart lays it all out pretty clearly. You've got Jack the Ripper from the 19th century, the ultimate historical mystery, a killer who was never caught. Then there's Raja Kalander, the embodiment of psychological depravity, a monster who was captured and sentenced. And finally, the parking garage killer, pure modern anonymity, a ghost in our machine who just vanished. So here's the big takeaway. Danger isn't just one single thing. It changes with the times. It can be the historical phantom lurking in the fog. It can be the depraved mind whose actions we can't even begin to comprehend. Or it can be the modern ghost who can look a camera right in the eye and still just disappear. And that leaves us with a pretty unsettling final thought, doesn't it? We live in an age of DNA testing, mass surveillance, digital footprints everywhere. So how do killers like the one in that parking garage still get away with it? It really makes you wonder, as our technology for catching them gets smarter, are there methods for avoiding it just getting smarter too?